Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm actually going to be doing a tutorial on this large flamingo painting right here. All the supplies that I'll use for this tutorial I will link in the description below, or at least I'll put them in the description. I'm using three basic colors to get started: white, black, and basically a reddish color. So this tutorial will basically take part in 5 different steps, really easy and straightforward. The first stage we're going to be working on is the base layer. So I'm taking my value layer basically, and the darkest value, which is that deep red I showed you earlier, and I'm going to start with the shadows on the flamingo. And then moving to the lighter shades, just mixing a little bit of white in with that red to slowly and gradually lighten up those shades. So you can see me moving to like a mid-tone and then a lighter tone finally on the rest of the flamingo's body there. And it doesn't have to be perfect or smooth. I am keeping the paint wet with a spray bottle, so if you see me spraying something, that is water. This is a rake brush that I'm going to be using now, and I'm going to be just dry brushing over the wet paint. This is going to help blend the colors together in a little more of a smoother gradient, and it will also help texture the paint so it looks a bit like feathers or fur, which in this case it will be feathers. Just going all over the body with this dry brush technique. Don't worry if you go over your lines a little bit. Obviously with the background you want to be more careful, but you can see I'm just starting to blend in the shades or the values in much better with this brush. And you want to make sure your paint remains wet, so don't forget to spray it if it does dry. Now I am working in a much larger scale. This is just because I'm working in a much bigger painting for once, and I decided to make a tutorial out of it. So it is a lot bigger than you would probably be doing this. Just making sure I get all the areas of the flamingo right there. And I'll go ahead and show you what this first layer should look like after the dry brushing technique and the values are kind of set in place. And again, don't worry if you go over your lines a little bit, because that will get a bit covered up as we move on to the next stage. So just a simple gradient with a little hint of texture in there, moving from our darkest areas to our lightest areas. Now once your painting or your base layer is dry, we can then move on to the next stage, which is adding a very light pink. So you can see the light pink there. I've also got my rake brush again, and we're going to start to add the pink texture to the flamingo. This is where we're going to start to add in a little bit of details to where the texture of the feathers are going to go. And you can say they're feathers, they sometimes look a little bit like fur. Either way, it really doesn't matter how you see it. I'm basically going to be covering the entire flamingo body in this layer right here. Now feathers and fur both naturally clump, so you want to create this sort of clumped effect with your texture, leaving some gaps so that base layer shows through a little bit. And again, covering the entire flamingo body in this layer right here. Don't worry if you feel like you're losing the value layer, and don't worry if you feel like you're losing any depth that you may have created with it, because we will be going back over with glazes and some shadows later on to bring back any color and vibrancy and depth that it may have lost. Just to show you what the final little product should look like after this stage is done. Just textured fur, or feathers I should say, all the way down the body. And again, leaving those gaps in so that you can really see the base layer come through. Now the next stage is we're going to be thickening some of that texture up. So I'm taking the same brush, same pinkish light tone, and I'm going to be thickening up some of these areas. I'm focusing this more on the lightest points on the flamingo. So I'm really putting in these brush strokes near the forehead where the light would be bouncing off of him, and on certain areas of his neck that the light would be shining in more. You can look at a reference photo for this. I typically do my values by eye now, just because I've done so many birds, I've practiced so many animals that I kind of know what I'm doing straight off the bat. But you can see me focusing this light pink, clustering it more towards the edges where the light is going to be hitting the flamingo in certain angles. Don't forget to, bring out some of the features, so his cheek right there, his forehead and the top of his head, just below the neck area, and things like that. So this next stage is going to be the glazing layer. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that my camera was not recording when I started glazing, so that's why the flamingo looks pretty much glazed already. But I'm basically using this larger flat brush here and some glazing medium and different pigments. So I'm using lots of glaze and a little bit of pigment. Glazing is a great way to boost vibrancy, bring out the shadows, add color, tint color, and what we're doing with this is we're tinting color over the top of all our work here. However, when you are using glazing, you want to make sure it's translucent enough that you can still see the work you've done underneath. So if you don't have glazing medium, you can use water. You just need to make sure it is translucent enough to see the work you've done underneath. Now the colors I'm using is like the red, like a pinkish red tone, as well as an orange, because around the flamingo I'll eventually have flowers and I want it to reflect the colors of the flowers. So you can tint to your heart content. You can put purples in for the shadows, you can even put greens in and things like that. So far I'm just going with oranges, a little bit of yellow here and there, and pinks mainly. You can choose whatever color of glaze you want to put on top, but those were my choices. As you can see here in certain lighting, it really comes out and it really brings out the depth in the actual flamingo itself. I love glazing. It's one of my most favorite techniques for giving some vibrancy and just depth to my animals. So now with the glazing layer all done and dried, we're going to focus on the next layer of the flamingo's feathers using my brightest and lightest pink. It's just basically mostly white and a tiny bit of that pink in there. And I'm going to use my rake brush again, and we're going to start adding that final layer of feathers to create the very top layer of highlights and texture. Again, you want to focus this on the brighter areas of the flamingo. So like I said before, the top of the head or face, the cheek area where it's going to sort of puff out a little bit, the certain places on the neck where he's going to shine a bit more. In your own paintings of a flamingo, if you want to have the light source coming from a different direction, that is more than fine. Here I'm just showing you an up close of the technique that I'm using. Again, I'm still using my rake brush for this. I will say when you are using rake brushes, I will suggest watering down the paint just a little bit. If you have too much paint on a rake brush, it's just going to end up sticking all those little bristles together, and you're just going to end up with globs of paint on the canvas. You want those bristles to stay splayed out and thinned out paint in order to show those individual brush strokes and hairlines, etc., etc. So you can see I'm keeping the focus of this brightest layer kind of to a minimum. I don't want to put too much on, otherwise we're going to lose that glaze, we're going to lose the texture underneath and all that value and everything. So I'm definitely keeping it to a minimal here, just so it really makes those areas pop out. The best way to make any painting realistic is to really focus those values. That is the biggest tip I can give any painter, whether it's animals, humans, flowers, whatever. Values are your best friends. So just a close-up of what your flamingo should look like after this layer. So the next step we're going to move on to is the beak. I'm going to be mixing more of a grayish tone here using black and white, and I find that flamingo beaks are mostly white. Occasionally they will have other colors reflected off them because white typically reflects its environment, but I'm just using this grayish tone to fill in some darker areas on the beak. I'm not too worried about where this positioning is going, I'm just kind of free flowing with it. Again, you want to base your shadows off of where your values are. So if your flamingo is shaded from the left side like mine is, then you want to keep your shadows heavy on the left side. I'm filling the bottom part of the flamingo beak with black because flamingo beaks typically have that black patch at the very end of their beaks. So I'm just filling that in with black. I'm leaving that center mouth line slightly unpainted. You'll see me leave a very thin gap right there. That just helps me find where the different mouth parts connect. And then just using that grey, filling in the certain areas. I'm going in with some white as well and just filling in the lighter areas. Again, we're just working with values. Values are so important in your paintings. They really help things pop out. Keeping the painting wet, I'm now going to use my finger to blend. And yes, I know that seems a little weird. I like to use my finger to blend. I find it creates such a smooth blend in a lot of my work. If you're not comfortable using your fingers, that's fine. You can use a brush, whatever works for you. I just like to blend with my finger because it's just such a smooth blend for me. And I'm just simply smoothing out between the greys and the white, creating that really subtle shadow and really subtle form on the flamingo's beak. Flamingo beaks aren't completely smooth and they're not completely white, and so that's why I'm putting in the greys in the first place. Now I'm darkening up some of these areas with the black. I'm also putting some of that grey into the black areas of the beak just to create some highlights, and then slowly working in some more blacks to really get a solid colour in there. Filling in his nose area, creating a little ridge, and then just going back and forth between the greys, the whites, the blacks, all throughout the flamingo to create some shadows that are really heavy. I'm also doing it around the eye area. We will be filling in the eye soon. Just using that black all throughout the beak area to create shadows, putting in some white in that black to create highlighted areas. And then I'll also put this darker color throughout the actual flamingo's body in the darkest areas. So right under his head there, where his neck and head meet, right under the face, in the corners of his body that will be resting against the flowers, as you can see here. So I'm going to be using these 2 smaller brushes right here. You can use detail brushes and whatever else you're comfortable with. We're going to be focusing on the eye now, which is the last part of this flamingo painting. I decided to go for a yellow eye color. Many flamingo eyes can either be yellow, white, red, pink, and sometimes they can be orangey colored as well. So pick whatever one you like. I decided to go for yellow because I think it would pop out more. I'm adding a little bit of white and black just to give it, again, that value layer. And then I'm also adding a tiny bit of that reddish orange color before filling in the pupil and adding some shadows around the actual eyeball itself. Then I'm going in with my detail brush and some pure white, and I'm adding some really tiny little dots all along the eyeball edge to create those highlights. And I'm going to do this in the eye. I'm going to create a little bit of a highlight, a glow to the actual eyeball itself, and then adding those definitive lifelike circles to the pupil. I'm also going to be adding some highlights all throughout the body, mostly focusing on the beak area because it does need some highlights right there. You can see me putting in those really stark, bright highlights in the pupil area. This makes any animal look alive, like it's got life to it. And then we're just going to take that same white, as I said, put it throughout the beak. Because beaks are smooth, they will have some kind of shine towards them. Focusing it a little bit on the eye, around the nose, right on the brightest parts of that beak, down the black part as well to create a shine. Just smoothing that out with my finger. And that's pretty much our flamingo painting. You can tweak it as much as you need to and add some highlight shadows here and there if you feel it needs that. But that is how you create a flamingo pretty much in 5 basic steps. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and stuck around to the end. If you did, then let me know, leave a comment and leave a like, and I guess I will see you all next time.